Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films and welcome to another random review. Today's random review comes from 1978 and it's The Odd Job, starring Graham Chapman and David Jason, directed by Peter Medak, the Hungarian director. He's a very interesting director. He's made lots of very interesting films, some of them flawed, but certainly fascinating, and this one's definitely flawed. This is a Severn UK Blu-ray. It's a fairly bare bones, but it does have lots of nice special features. The US Severn, I think, comes probably with a booklet and a slipcover perhaps, but this is the Severn UK, who are doing a sale at the moment of obviously some of the releases, but not all Severn titles are obviously available in the UK, and this is multi-region. As I said, this is from 1978. It's got a tremendous cast, apart from Chapman and Jason. It's got Diana Quick, Simon Williams, Edward Hardwicke, Bill Patterson, Michael Elphick, Carolyn Seymour, Joe Melia, George Innes, Richard O'Brien, and John Judd, to name just about everybody. But what's fascinating is almost who could have been in the film. Now, Graham Chapman, he wanted to be the first Monty Python member to have a solo film. Granted, this came out in the same year as Life of Brian, and as we know, Graham Chapman had a bit of a drinking problem, and he was fairly melancholic and morose, just like quite a lot of famous comedians. He wasn't particularly an actor, as you could probably tell with his performance, but this was based, it was written by Bernard McKenna, who actually appears in some Monty Python films in small roles, but this was based on his script from a TV show, or LWT, in 1971. It was only a half-hour version of the film, and it starred David Jason, but it was Ronnie Barker, the wonderful Ronnie Barker, in the Graham Chapman role, and Joan Sim playing his wife. Now, Bernard McKenna also made Yellowbeard with Graham Chapman, which is always deemed as one of the worst films ever made. But Chapman had this desire to be the first Python to have a solo film by himself. So the film is about a fairly ordinary man played by Chapman, who his wife leaves him and he's so despondent, he tries to kill himself, can't really do it, and David Jason plays an odd job man who comes round, and Graham Chapman basically hires him to kill him, but then he has second thoughts, but David Jason wants to finish the job. Now, as I said, it's kind of interesting for the people that Graham Chapman and Medak kind of tried to get for the David Jason role, even though, as I said, Jason played it in the TV version. So Peter Sellers' name came up. He was making another Pink Panther film at the time, and wanted to make The Odd Job, but the script wasn't really anywhere. Peter O'Toole, which probably wouldn't have been as successful. He was up for the David Jason role, and the strangest one was Keith Moon, the famous Who drummer who liked partying perhaps even more than Graham Chapman. You could imagine trying to be on a film set with Keith Moon and Graham Chapman and trying to get them to actually work. But apparently Bernard McKenna, one of the extras, says Keith Moon, he wanted him to come in and audition, because again, he's not an actor, and he did say it was absolutely awful, so it would have been an absolute nightmare having Keith Moon. And David Jason is kind of perfect in it, and again, he did the TV show, so it made a TV version, so it kind of just made so much sense just to have David Jason in it. Now I will say there are plenty of 1-star reviews on Letterboxd for this film. There's even half-star reviews, which you don't see very often, unless you go looking. But there's half-star reviews for this film. A lot of the comedy doesn't land, so I can see why people might not like the film. It just appealed to me, and I thought it was a lot of fun, but I can see why some people might just not like it at all. The special features, there's an introduction by Peter Medak, there's an audio interview with Peter Medak, there's a Zoom reunion between David Jason, or Sir David Jason now, and Peter Medak, which was the first time they'd actually seen each other since 1978. And David Jason says at the end, always a pleasure, and it's like, well, you supposedly haven't spoken to him from 1978. And then there's an interview with Bernard McKenna, the writer, there's an interview with the co-producer, and there's a wonderful interview with Richard O'Brien from his home in New Zealand. Didn't know Richard O'Brien lives in New Zealand. There's an interview with Carolyn Seymour, who was Peter Medak's wife. I'm sure that's why she didn't get the role. And there's also an interview with Simon Williams, who talks about how awful the film is. Obviously David Jason and Peter Medak talk about it in slightly more glowing terms, but it's funny that one of the actors involved just said it's awful. You don't really hear that very often. Oh, he did say he had a wonderful time making it, but it's just an awful film. I mean, even at 88 minutes, as I said, the original script, the TV script's 30 minutes long. So obviously 88 minutes is stretched out a bit. And again, some people are probably going to hate some of the humour. And I admit myself, some of the humour doesn't really land. But some of it did make me smile quite a bit. So, as I said, Graham Chapman he changes his mind. And the police are involved, and the police have a nice little double act with Edward Hardwick, who again, you might not recognise his name, but you'll recognise his face, and Bill Patterson, the wonderful Bill Patterson. And Bill Patterson is always kind of overstepping and finishing Edward Hardwick's sentences. I don't know whether John Landis saw this for the two policemen in American Werewolf in London, but it's a similar shtick. But I think it's actually better in this film, just because Bill Patterson's hilarious. And obviously there's attempts that go wrong, and innocent people end up dying, and the police are putting pressure on Graham Chapman to find out whether anybody would want to kill him or anything like that. There's a nice performance by George Innes as the kind of caretaker, the racist caretaker who's always blaming like missing milk on the Italians or the Germans. There's a really nice touch where John Judd plays police officer, and with other police, if there's cars to be towed because they're on double yellow lines or whatever, they just race them, which is quite funny. And then eventually at the end of his tether, Simon Williams plays his wife's friend, who sees himself as her lover, but she doesn't quite agree. He has contacts with the underworld, and it's Michael Elphick and his brother. It's obviously The Craze, which of course Peter Medak would direct The Craze later on with the Kemp brothers and Billy Whitelaw. So that's a nice little touch. Michael Elphick's hilarious as one of the Craze. The other one, I can't remember the actor's name, but he just spends most of the time stuttering. Yes, there's stuttering jokes in the film. But Michael Elphick obviously likes The Boys, and that's Richard O'Brien, who plays a bit of a leather-bound queen called Batch, who plays it rather over the top, but has some funny lines. So ends up there's gangsters involved, there's the police involved, and they're all trying to find David Jason, who has this trench coat. Well, you can see, but he has this trench coat and a helmet and goggles. Again, some people are not going to find this film funny at all, and other people it's going to tickle their funny bone. Against Chapman's not really an actor, even though he can obviously pull off King Arthur and Brian well enough, but you can kind of see his limitations in this. Again, he wasn't a fan of kind of structure, so as an actor I guess he was kind of frustrating a little bit. So again, going back, imagining Graham Chapman and Keith Moon on the same film set would have just been, the film would have probably never get made. So it's definitely an oddity, but Severn are releasing Negatives as well, which is another early Peter Medak film, which I might have to check out, because again, he's an interesting director. He did The Ruling Class, which really needs a Blu-ray, with Peter O'Toole, which is fabulous. As I said, he did The Craze, he did The Changeling with George C. Scott, which is one of the best kind of ghost stories of the last 50 years. He did he did Romeo is Bleeding with Gary Oldman. Yeah, lots of odd little films, and this is certainly odd as well. So if you believe some of Letterboxd and Simon Williams, this film's absolutely awful. But if you take my word for it, it's actually rather enjoyable. But again, it's not for everybody. But I say that just about every film I talk about in this channel. So that's The Odd Job, and again, it's interesting that Severn are dipping their toe in the UK market as well. As I said, there's a sale on if you go to severn.uk. It's not a whole load of titles, but I picked up Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker on 4K for rather cheap, and I picked up Polanski's What, which I couldn't even finish, and have since sold, so for what that's worth. Yes, that's Odd Job, certainly an odd little film, but if you want to see Graham Chapman outside of Python, it's well worth a look, mainly for David Jason and the supporting cast, where you can point out, oh, that's that guy from that, or I remember her from this. It's one of those films. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know if you've seen The Odd Job and what you think of it, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.